Admiral Kren stood in the command center of Valoria Prime's defense network, staring at the holographic displays floating in front of him. His 4 eyes blinked in sequence, something his species did when stressed or confused. Right now, he was both. For 50,000 years, the Vailian Empire had ruled the galaxy from this fortress world. It wasn't just a planet. It was the most heavily defended location in known space. 16 separate layers of sensor grids surrounded it like invisible shields. Millions of automated weapons platforms floated in orbit, ready to destroy anything that didn't belong. Defense fleets were stationed at every conceivable entry point, every jump corridor, every possible route of approach. The Empire had fought wars. They'd faced invasions from species long since extinct. They'd beaten back the Krellian hordes when everyone said it was impossible. Through all of it, through 50 millennia of conflict and peace, one thing had remained absolutely certain. Nothing breached the inner defense sphere. Ever. Until today. How did it get past the outer grids? Kren demanded, his voice coming out harsh and metallic through the translator device embedded in his throat. He slammed one of his 4 hands on the control panel, making the junior officers around him flinch. Security Chief Thex, a larger Valerian with darker scales, worked frantically at his console. His clawed fingers moved so fast they were nearly a blur. Sweat glistened on his forehead, which was unusual. Valorians rarely sweated unless they were terrified. "Sir, I don't know," Thex admitted, his voice shaking slightly. "It just appeared. 10,000 kilometers from the planet's surface. Inside the final defensive layer. It's like it materialized out of nothing." Kren moved closer to the main display, studying the intruder. The holographic projection showed a warship, relatively small by Imperial standards. Maybe 300 meters long. It had clean lines and a sleek design that suggested it was built for speed rather than raw power. But it was clearly armed. He could see weapon ports along its hull. The identification transponder marked it as the USS Montana. The design was unmistakably human. Humans? Kren's scales rippled with confusion, a physical reaction his species couldn't control. The primitives? They only achieved faster-than-light travel 15 years ago. How is this possible? "Yes, sir," Thex confirmed, pulling up a file on humanity. "They have 12 colonial worlds. Their military consists of approximately 500 vessels. All of them outdated compared to our technology. They shouldn't be capable of this. They don't have stealth technology. They don't have quantum phase shifters. They don't have anything that could bypass our sensors." Around the command center, dozens of officers were shouting into communicators, trying to understand what had happened. How had this single human ship appeared inside defenses that were supposed to be impenetrable? Every sensor log was being reviewed. Every defensive system was being checked for malfunctions. Nobody had answers. Lieutenant Vex, a younger officer manning the communication station, held up one of his hands for attention. "Sir, the human ship is broadcasting a message on all channels." "What does it say?" Kren asked, his voice tight. Vex activated the speakers. A calm voice filled the command center, speaking in perfect Valerian without a trace of an accent. The translation was flawless, almost too perfect. "USS Montana requesting permission to dock at diplomatic station. We come in peace. Captain Beth Harrison commanding." The command center fell silent. Everyone stared at the speakers like they might explode. "They come in peace." Thex repeated, his voice incredulous. "They breached the most secure defensive network in the galaxy and they come in peace." "Maybe they don't understand what they've done," suggested Lieutenant Vex nervously. "Maybe they think this is normal procedure?" Kren shook his head slowly. "No. No one is that ignorant. They know exactly what they've done." He turned to face the main display, studying the small human ship that had somehow accomplished the impossible. "This is a message. They're showing us they can reach us whenever they want." In the Imperial Senate chamber, 3 floors below, the Emperor's annual address had come to a screeching halt. Emergency alarms blared through the massive hall. The assembled representatives from 1,000 different worlds sat in stunned silence, looking around in confusion. Nothing ever interrupted the Emperor's speech. Nothing. The Emperor himself, dressed in flowing ceremonial robes that marked him as the supreme ruler of half the galaxy, stood frozen at his podium. His personal guards had surrounded him, weapons drawn, scanning for threats. "What is happening?" the Emperor demanded, his voice amplified to fill the entire chamber. His chief military advisor, an old Valerian named Grax, hurried up the steps to the podium. He leaned in close, whispering urgently. The Emperor's expression changed from confusion to shock to barely controlled rage. A human ship, the Emperor said, loud enough for everyone to hear. Impossible. But it wasn't impossible. It had happened. And in his command center, Admiral Kren was beginning to realize something terrifying. If humans could get one ship past all their defenses, appearing without warning in the heart of their empire, what else could they do? How many other human ships might be out there right now, hiding in places they shouldn't be able to reach, watching and waiting? Kren looked at the Montana on his display, sitting there calmly as if appearing inside the galaxy's most secure location was no big deal. The ship wasn't moving. Wasn't threatening anyone. Just sitting there, waiting for permission to dock. Get me the Emperor, Kren ordered quietly. And somebody figure out how they did this before I lose my mind. Captain Beth Harrison sat calmly in her command chair aboard the Montana, her hands resting loosely on the armrests. Through the massive view screen that dominated the front of the bridge, she watched as Valyrian warships continued to arrive. They were surrounding her vessel like sharks circling prey. There were at least 50 of them now, maybe more. Each one was easily 3 times the size of the Montana, their hulls bristling with weapons that could turn her ship into scrap metal in seconds. Every single weapon was locked onto her vessel. She could see the targeting lasers painting the Montana's hull, little red dots that meant death was just a trigger pull away. They seem upset, Lieutenant Jerry Walsh commented from the navigation station. He was a young officer, only 24 years old, and this was his first real assignment. His hands were gripping his console a bit too tightly, his knuckles white. Beth glanced over at him and allowed herself a slight smile. Can you blame them? We just walked through the galaxy's most secure defense network like it wasn't even there. I'd be upset too if I were them. Should I be worried about those weapons, Captain? Jerry asked, trying to keep his voice steady. I mean, they're all pointed at us. Every single one. Not yet, Beth replied calmly. We were invited. Sort of. They might be angry, but they're not going to shoot us while we're broadcasting peaceful intentions. That would look bad in front of their Emperor. Sort of invited isn't the same as actually invited. True. But we're here now, aren't we? Around the bridge, the rest of her crew was watching the Valyrian ships with varying degrees of concern. Some looked nervous. Others looked excited. They trained for this moment for months, running simulations of what might happen when they appeared inside Valyrian space. But simulations were different from the real thing. The Montana shuddered suddenly as something clamped onto its hull. The sound of metal connecting with metal echoed through the ship. Beth sat up straighter in her chair. They are boarding us, Lieutenant Commander Tyler Brooks announced from the tactical station. He was older than Jerry, maybe 35, with the kind of calm demeanor that came from years of military service. Docking clamp attached to airlock 3. Reading multiple life signs. How many? Beth asked. 20. Maybe 25. All armed. Open the airlock. Let them through. But keep our weapon systems on standby, just in case. Yes, Beth stood up and straightened her uniform. She wanted to look professional, composed, like someone who hadn't just committed what the Valorians probably considered an act of war. She walked to the center of the bridge and waited. The bridge doors hissed open a few minutes later. Security Chief Thex marched in first, and Beth had to stop herself from taking a step back. He was huge. Thex stood at least 7 feet tall, with dark scales that looked almost black in the bridge lighting. 4 muscular arms hung at his sides, each one holding some kind of scanning device. Behind him, a squad of Valyrian soldiers spread out across the bridge, their weapons drawn but not quite pointed at anyone. The soldiers positioned themselves strategically, covering every exit, every console. They were professional, Beth noted. Well trained. They moved like soldiers who'd done this kind of thing before. Thex's 4 eyes focused on Beth. They blinked in sequence, which she'd learned meant the Valyrian was either stressed or trying to intimidate someone. Probably both. Captain Harrison, Thex said, his voice coming through a small translator device attached to his throat. The translation made his voice sound harsh and mechanical, with odd pauses between words. You will explain how you breached our defenses. Now. Beth noticed he didn't use the word please. This wasn't a polite request. It was a demand backed by armed soldiers and 50 warships outside. Of course, Beth replied, keeping her voice friendly and cooperative. We're happy to explain everything. We're here to talk, after all. She turned and gestured to her tactical officer. Lieutenant Commander Tyler Brooks, please show our guests our flight data. Tyler nodded and began working at his console. Pulling up navigation logs now, Captain. The main view screen switched from showing the Valyrian ships to displaying a detailed map of the Montana's journey. Lines traced their route from human space to Valoria Prime, moving through layer after layer of the defensive network. Thex moved closer to the screen, his scanning devices beeping and chirping as they analyzed the data. His scales rippled slightly, a sign of confusion. This shows you traveled through normal space. Sublight engines only. No jump drives. No faster-than-light travel in the final approach. That's correct, Beth confirmed. That's impossible, Thex said flatly. You'd have to pass through 16 sensor grids. Each grid extends millions of kilometers. You couldn't possibly cross that distance without being detected. Our systems are designed to catch anything larger than a piece of space debris. Tyler pulled up another display, showing timestamps. We spent 3 months making the final approach. Moving very, very slowly. 1 kilometer per hour for most of the journey. 3 months. One of the Valyrian soldiers muttered something in his own language that the translator didn't bother converting. Probably a curse word. Your sensors are excellent, Beth continued. Really top-notch technology. But they are calibrated for threats that move like threats. Fast attack ships. Jump drive signatures. Energy weapons charging. We didn't do any of that. Thex's eyes narrowed. You're saying you bypassed our defenses by moving slowly? That's part of it, Beth admitted. We also coated our ship in ice and asteroid debris. Made ourselves look like a natural object. When your active scans passed over us, we shut down everything except life support. Put the crew in cryosleep. Your sensors saw us as space junk and moved on. The bridge was completely silent. Thex stared at the display, then at Beth, then back at the display. His scales had gone pale. You spent 3 months drifting through space, he said slowly, just to prove you could reach our capital. Beth smiled. Yes. We did. Commander Tyler Brooks stood at the front of a large briefing room deep inside the Valyrian military headquarters. The room was packed with alien officers, maybe 100 of them, all staring at him with expressions ranging from curiosity to barely concealed hostility. Some had their arms crossed. Others were leaning back in their chairs with skeptical looks. A few were openly glaring at him. Tyler had given briefings before, but never to an audience that wanted to see him fail this badly. These weren't just military officers. These were the pride of an empire that had ruled the galaxy for 50,000 years. And he was about to explain how a species that discovered space travel 15 years ago had made their defenses look useless. No pressure. Your sensors are excellent, Tyler began, pulling up a technical schematic on the holographic display behind him. The image showed the 16 layers of Valoria Prime's defense network, each one marked in a different color. Truly impressive technology. They look for energy signatures, mass displacement, quantum fluctuations, gravitational anomalies. You've built a perfect defense system against threats that use your own technology. Admiral Kren, sitting in the front row, leaned forward. His 4 eyes were locked on Tyler, unblinking. Explain what you mean by that. Tyler took a breath. Here came the part that would either make them understand or make them furious. Probably both. Valyrian jump drives create spatial distortions when they activate, Tyler explained, highlighting a section of the schematic. It's unavoidable. The technology literally bends space to move faster than light. Your sensors are designed to detect those distortions from millions of kilometers away. It's brilliant, really. Any ship using jump drive technology can't get anywhere near your capital without you knowing about it. So how did you get close? Kren demanded. We didn't use jump drives, Tyler said simply. We traveled at sublight speed for the final approach. Spent 3 months crossing the distance that most ships would jump across in minutes. A murmur rippled through the room. Several officers exchanged glances. One of them, a general with silver scales, stood up. 3 months? You're saying you drifted through space for 3 months just to avoid detection? Yes, sir, Tyler confirmed. That's insane, the general said flatly. No military would waste that much time on a single approach. It's inefficient. Impractical. It's patient, Tyler corrected gently. And patience is something humans are very good at when we need to be. Security Chief Thex, standing against the back wall with his 4 arms crossed, spoke up. Our sensors would still detect your ship even at sublight speeds. We scan for mass displacement. Your ship has mass. It would show up. Not if we moved slowly enough, Tyler replied, pulling up another display. This one showed sensor sensitivity curves and detection thresholds. Your sensors are calibrated for fast-moving targets. Military vessels traveling at combat speeds. Merchant ships using standard traffic lanes. Anything moving faster than, say, 100 kilometers per hour. He pointed to a specific line on the graph. We crept forward at 1 kilometer per hour for weeks at a time. We were below your detection thresholds. Your sensors literally couldn't see us because we were moving too slowly to register as a ship. The room erupted into conversation. Officers were arguing with each other, pointing at the displays, pulling out their own data tablets to check the numbers. Tyler let them talk for a moment before continuing. That's not all, he said, and the room fell silent again. Your defense network is designed to spot artificial materials and energy sources. Metal hulls. Power cores. Engine emissions. So we coated the Montana in ice and debris collected from asteroid fields. Meters thick in some places. From the outside, we looked like a natural object. Just another chunk of rock drifting through space. Admiral Kren's scales had gone pale. You disguised your ship as an asteroid. Yes, sir. And when your active scans swept through our area, and they did, 16 times during our approach, we went completely cold. Shut down every system except minimal life support running on battery power. Put the crew in cryosleep. For 12 to 18 hours at a time, the Montana was essentially a dead ship. No heat signature. No energy readings. Nothing that would distinguish us from actual space debris. Lieutenant Commander Patricia Moore, who'd been standing quietly beside Tyler, added, our crew was in and out of cryosleep for 3 months. It wasn't comfortable. Some people got sick. But it worked. One of the younger Valerian officers, his scales still bright with youth, raised a hand tentatively. But surely someone should have noticed. Visual confirmation. Manual checks. Something. Tyler shook his head. Think about how many rocks and chunks of ice float through space. Thousands. Millions. Your people do spot checks, but they can't manually verify every single piece of debris. It would take forever. So your systems filter out anything that looks natural. We made sure we looked very, very natural. He pulled up a final image showing the Montana during its approach. It was almost unrecognizable, covered in rough ice and rock, tumbling slowly through space like it had been drifting for centuries. Your defenses are perfect, Tyler said quietly, looking around the room at all the shocked faces, against enemies who fight like you. Who use your technology. Who follow standard military doctrine. We fight like us. We're patient. We're creative. We don't follow rules that don't make sense to us. And we will absolutely spend 3 months sitting in a frozen ship if that's what it takes to make a point. The room was dead silent now. Every officer was staring at the image of the disguised Montana, understanding dawning on their faces. Security Chief Thex finally spoke, his voice rough. How many other human ships are inside our borders right now? Tyler looked at Captain Beth Harrison, who was standing in the doorway. She gave him a small nod. 17 ships, Admiral Kren, Tyler said. We have 17 vessels positioned throughout your empire at this very moment. The holographic map flickered to life in the center of the Valerian war room, floating above the conference table like a three-dimensional star chart. The moment it fully materialized, every military officer present felt their blood run cold. Some actually took a step backward. Others simply stared, unable to process what they were seeing. 17 red markers were scattered across the map, each one representing a human ship hidden somewhere inside the Valerian Empire. They weren't clustered together in one area. They were spread out strategically, positioned near some of the most critical and sensitive locations in Imperial space. Lieutenant Amy Foster from the Montana's intelligence section stood beside the holographic display, looking calm and professional despite the fact that she was basically announcing an invasion. She was young, maybe 26, with short brown hair and the kind of steady voice that suggested she'd rehearsed this presentation many times. This one, Amy said, pointing to a red marker near the outer rim of the Empire, is positioned near your primary shipyards in the Kelva system. It's been there for 9 months. Admiral Kren felt his scales ripple involuntarily. The Kelva shipyards built 80% of the Empire's military vessels. If humans had been watching them for 9 months. Amy moved her hand to another marker. This one is positioned near your central communications hub on Nexus Station. It arrived 6 months ago. The communications hub. Every message sent within the Empire passed through Nexus Station. Command orders. Military dispatches. Encrypted government communications. Everything. This one, Amy continued, moving to a third marker, is near your antimatter production facility on Dravis 3. 7 months in position. She kept going, pointing out each marker, explaining what critical facility or strategic location each hidden human ship was watching. Each revelation was worse than the last. They had ships near fuel depots, near military academies, near defensive installations, near trade routes. Then Amy pointed to a marker that was practically sitting on top of Valoria Prime itself. This one, she said quietly, letting the implication sink in, is 3,000 kilometers from the Imperial Palace. The room erupted. Officers were shouting, some in anger, others in disbelief. General Vox, the one who'd called humans insane earlier, slammed both fists on the table hard enough to make the holographic projector shake. Admiral Kren just stared at the map, all 4 of his hands clenched into tight fists. He felt something he hadn't felt in decades. Fear. Real, genuine fear. How long have they been there? He asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Amy checked her data pad. The longest has been in position for 14 months. The shortest arrived 3 weeks ago. They've all been reporting back regularly, sending data about your defensive patterns, ship movements, communication protocols. 14 months. Humans had been inside Valerian space for over a year, watching, learning, and nobody had noticed. Nobody had suspected a thing. The Valerian military exploded into action. Within minutes, orders were flying across communication channels. Fleets mobilized from their stations, racing toward the marked locations. Scanning protocols were completely rewritten, adjusted to look for the slow-moving, cold signatures that human ships used. Teams of specialists were dispatched to every single marked location with orders to find those ships and secure them. Over the next 6 hours, one by one, they found them. And each discovery was more unsettling than the last. What looked like a large chunk of ice floating near the Kelva shipyards turned out to contain a complete life support system, weapons arrays, and a crew of 12 humans who'd been living in cramped conditions for 9 months. When Valerian soldiers boarded, they found the humans calmly eating dinner like this was completely normal. The asteroid near Nexus Station had listening equipment powerful enough to intercept and decode encrypted military communications. The humans operating it had compiled a database of Valerian military codes and protocols. The debris field near Dravis 3 contained a ship with enough firepower to cripple the antimatter facility if given the order. The crew had been practicing targeting solutions for 7 months. Each discovery confirmed what Admiral Kren had feared. This wasn't just a demonstration. This was a full intelligence operation that had been running for over a year. Humans had systematically mapped the Empire's vulnerabilities, positioned assets to exploit them, and done it all without anyone noticing. Meanwhile, Captain Beth Harrison found herself standing in the Imperial throne room, a massive chamber with ceilings that stretched at least 100 feet high. The walls were covered in precious metals and stones from 1,000 conquered worlds. It was designed to make visitors feel small and insignificant. It was working. Beth felt very small right now. The Emperor sat on his throne platform 30 feet above the floor, surrounded by armed guards and advisors. He was enormous, even for a Valerian, with scales that had darkened to nearly black with age. When he spoke, his voice boomed through the chamber like thunder, amplified by the room's acoustics. "You have committed an act of war," the Emperor declared, each word echoing off the walls. "You have violated our sovereignty. You have infiltrated our territory. You have positioned weapons near our most sacred and critical facilities. Explain to me why I shouldn't order my fleet to reduce your colonies to ash." Beth stood alone in the center of the massive room, looking up at the Emperor. She was acutely aware of the guards, the weapons pointed in her direction, the fact that she was completely at the mercy of an empire that could crush humanity without breaking a sweat. But she kept her voice steady. "Because, Your Majesty, if we'd wanted war, you'd already be at war." The standoff lasted 3 days. 3 very long days where nobody slept much and everyone waited for someone to make the first move. The Valerian Military Council met in continuous emergency session in a secure bunker beneath the Imperial Palace. The room was thick with tension, the air recyclers working overtime to keep up with the body heat from dozens of officers packed into a space meant for half that many. Admiral Kren found himself in the unusual position of arguing against war. It went against every instinct he had. His species had been warriors for 50,000 years. The Valerian Empire had been built on military strength, on the willingness to use force when necessary. Weakness was not tolerated. Threats were eliminated. But this situation was different. This required thinking, not just fighting. "We should obliterate them," General Vox insisted, slamming his clawed hand on the conference table hard enough to leave a dent in the metal. He was the Empire's most decorated military commander, a veteran of a dozen wars. Destroy their ships. Invade their colonies. Make an example of them so brutal that no other species will ever dare try something like this again. Several officers around the table nodded in agreement. The sentiment was popular. Humans had embarrassed the Empire in front of the entire galaxy. Word was already spreading. Other species were talking. Wondering. Questioning whether the Valyrian Empire was as powerful as it claimed to be. And if there are more ships we haven't found. Kren asked quietly, his voice cutting through the angry murmurs. The room fell silent. Everyone turned to look at him. Kren stood up slowly, his 4 hands resting on the table. We found 17 ships. The ones they told us about. But what if there are more? What if right now, at this very moment, there are human vessels watching us that we still haven't detected? We swept every sector, Vox protested. We found them all. Did we? Kren challenged. We found 17 ships using the detection methods they taught us. But what if they have other methods? Other tricks we don't know about yet? What if telling us about 17 ships was just another way to misdirect us? He pulled up humanity's historical records on the main display. Images appeared showing various wars and conflicts from Earth's past. Kren had spent the last 3 days studying human history, barely sleeping, trying to understand this species that had so thoroughly outmaneuvered them. I've been studying their species, Kren continued, gesturing at the display. They are warrior culture, but they hide it beneath layers of civility and politeness. They smile. They negotiate. They talk about peace. But look at their history. Look at what happens to people who attack them thinking they're weak. He pulled up a specific image, a battle from Earth's Second World War. Here. A nation attacked them by surprise, destroying much of their military fleet in a single strike. Everyone thought they were finished. Instead, they rebuilt and fought back for 4 years until their attackers surrendered unconditionally. Another image appeared, showing a different conflict. Here. A massive empire invaded them, thinking their weapons and numbers would overwhelm the humans quickly. Instead, the humans fought in the snow and cold for years, making the enemy bleed for every kilometer of ground. Eventually, the invaders gave up and went home. Kren looked around the room at the faces of his fellow officers. Every time in their history someone attacked humans thinking they were weak, those attackers regretted it. The Montana didn't stumble into our territory by accident. It came here as part of a carefully planned operation with 17 other ships as insurance. We found those ships, Vox insisted stubbornly. We found the ships they told us about, Kren corrected, emphasizing each word. The ships they wanted us to find. Think about it. They spent 3 months infiltrating our defenses. They positioned vessels throughout our territory for over a year. Does that sound like a species that leaves things to chance? Or does it sound like a species that plans for every contingency? He leaned forward. How many more ships are out there that we haven't found? How many are watching us right now, reporting back to their command, preparing for war if we're stupid enough to start one? The Emperor had been sitting silently in his observation chamber, watching the debate through a one-way window. He was old, far older than most Valorians lived to be. He'd ruled the Empire for 3 centuries. He'd seen wars, won victories, made the hard decisions that came with absolute power. But he'd never faced a situation quite like this. Admit weakness by negotiating with a species everyone considered primitive, or risk war with an enemy that was already inside his defenses, with unknown capabilities, and a demonstrated willingness to be patient and creative. The weight of the decision pressed down on him like a physical thing. Either choice would have consequences that would echo for generations. Then his assistant entered the observation chamber with a message. Your Majesty, Captain Harrison has requested another audience with you. She says she has a proposal. The Emperor studied the message for a long moment, then made his decision. Bring her in. Captain Beth Harrison entered the throne room for the second time in 3 days. She looked tired but composed, her uniform crisp despite everything. She walked to the center of the chamber and bowed respectfully to the Emperor. Your Majesty, she began, I believe we can end this standoff in a way that benefits everyone. Speak, the Emperor commanded. Our ships will leave your territory. All of them. We'll share our infiltration methods in complete detail so you can upgrade your defenses against this type of approach. We'll even help you implement the upgrades and train your people. The Emperor leaned forward slightly. In exchange for what? Beth smiled. Humanity receives full sovereignty. Protection from annexation by any galactic power. and a seat on the Galactic Council with full voting rights. There was a pause. "Oh," Beth added, "and we'd like to sell you our stealth detection technology. We built countermeasures as soon as we invented the infiltration method. We can teach you how to see ships using our techniques. For a reasonable price, of course." Admiral Kren, listening from the war room, found himself laughing despite everything. These humans had breached the Empire's defenses, demonstrated they could strike anywhere, scared everyone half to death, and now they wanted to sell the solution. It was brilliant. Absolutely brilliant. After another day of deliberation, the Emperor agreed to the terms. The Montana prepared to depart, broadcasting its intentions clearly. Around the Empire, the other human vessels began powering up, shedding their disguises, making themselves visible. As the Montana undocked from the diplomatic station, Admiral Kren received a final message from Captain Harrison. He read it twice, then a third time, and felt a chill run through his entire body. "By the way, we only had 5 ships in your territory, not 17. The other 12 locations were decoys, just sensor ghosts and false readings designed to make you think we had more assets than we actually did. But you'll probably want to keep checking those positions. Just to be sure. Also, you might want to scan your outer colonies more carefully. Sweet dreams, Admiral." Kren stared at the message for a long time. Then, despite everything, he started laughing. It was the laugh of someone who just realized they'd been outthought at every single step. The Valyrian Empire had learned a valuable lesson: never underestimate a species just because they are new to space. Especially not humans. Retriclord can make mistakes. Please double-check responses. Sonnet 4.5.